The purpose of the Common Read program is to provide incoming students with a shared intellectual experience. So this is why you were sent the book over the summer, with the idea that you'd read it over the summer before you arrived on campus so that you would be prepared to participate in campus-wide discussions about the year of the flood. Our hope is that some of the themes in this book, The Year of the Flood, could help you see connections between CI and the other courses that you're taking and will take at Austin College. Another purpose of the Common Read program is to invite you and to introduce you into academic conversations that cross the disciplines. Now, this is the hallmark of a liberal arts education, and especially an Austin College education. The faculty chose The Year of the Flood by Margaret Atwood as the Common Read because it introduces so many topics and issues that are integrated into the curriculum at Austin College. So some of those issues include thoroughly present-day components of what we're talking about today, like the relationship between science and religion, women's issues, genetic and bioengineering, social and economic inequality, and issues of environmental destruction. And these are all topics we hear about in the news, all topics that you can study in different classes at Austin College. And we're hoping that you'll see these issues in a new way by reading and talking about the Year of the Flood. We can also talk about what it's doing as a piece of literature, the point of view, the fragmented chronology, the development of characters, and of course, the unresolved ending. So there are many angles into the novel, and it can be appreciated on so many different levels. The faculty panel that we're about to hear from today represents faculty from 5 different departments in all 3 institutional divisions on campus: the sciences, the social sciences, and the humanities. Each faculty member will talk about how the novel speaks to their discipline or the concerns of their department, and in some cases, even their CI course. So I'm going to let each faculty member introduce themselves. Their comments will probably provide some focus and clarity into our discussions of the novel, but they might leave you with even more questions about the Year of the Flood, which is just an indication of what a really rich, compelling, and layered piece of literature it is.
I'm a member of the English department here, and what that means is that I care a lot about words. So my main task is definitional, and things will get probably much more interesting after I finish this. The Year of the Flood is the second in a projected dystopian trilogy of novels by Margaret Atwood. Atwood published another dystopic novel in 1985, The Handmaid's Tale, made into a movie and an opera. And that novel presented a quite negative view of religion is in a possible future. I'm sorry, Margaret, I offended you somehow. Margaret Atwood is a very tough lady, okay? Her approach in The Year of the Flood, her approach to religion is more complex than it is in The Handmaid's Tale, but religion is quite central. Her original title for this novel was God's Gardeners. But both her Canadian and her American publishers objected to this title. Her British publisher did not. The title she finally chose is also built on a religious framework, however, referring to the story of Noah and the ark that saved one family of humans as well as pairs of animals from universal destruction. So let's look a little bit at the history and the meaning of the word dystopia. There are 2 names from this that you should remember. If you don't already know them, remember them now: Sir Thomas More and John Stuart Mill. Both of them are social philosophers, among other things. Thomas More was a Renaissance humanist. That is, he was part of a group of thinkers who essentially founded our concept of liberal arts education. He lived in the late 15th, early 16th centuries. And he's the person who coined the word utopia for the name of a work he wrote in 1516. Utopia is an imaginary ideal island. John Stuart Mill lives in the 19th century. Mill is one of the architects of our concepts of individual rights, including women's rights, and he's the first known person to use the word dystopia. He uses it not as a noun but an adjective. And he uses it to mean the opposite of the kind of ideal society that utopia means. He's an Englishman, and he uses the word dystopian to describe British policy toward Ireland, which he thought was brutal. Now, topia derives from a Greek word meaning place. And U, which is EU, not just plain U, but EU in many words that connect with utopia, means good or beneficial or kind. So as in eugenics, which is actually a pretty horrifying word, but it was meant to mean something good. Euphemism, Eucharist, eukaryotes, evangelist, interestingly enough, because the U is sometimes replaced by a V. Dystopia, on the other hand, dys means bad, damaged, not working properly, as in dysfunctional, dystrophy, dysplasia, and a host of negative medical terms. The first written use of the noun dystopia is in 1952 in a literary critical book about Brave New World, 1984, works of that kind from the middle of the 20th century. But the critical book in which the word dystopia appears applies it specifically to a 17th century work, a satire, by the English Bishop Joseph Hall. In the past 15 to 20 years, as you well know, there's been an explosion of dystopian novels and movies, and most of them quite specifically satiric, as Hall's dystopia was satiric. Important elements of dystopias include grim or gruesome or severely deprived surroundings. Sometimes, though, dystopias are superficially pleasant, and some people think they're in a utopia. Dystopias are about the human will to survive and do more than survive. They tell us what we value and what it means to be human. The Year of the Flood is centrally concerned with the role of religion and the intertwined roots of religion and science, and how easily these things overlap in the minds of human beings. At the end of the waterless flood, in Year of the Flood, the human race might have perished. Surviving humans are few and separated. How will this play out? Presumably, we find out in the third novel in the trilogy, not yet published.
Thank you, Carol. My name is Jennifer Randalls, and I am a faculty member in the Sociology and Anthropology Department, and I am a sociologist. And my CI topic this semester is the social science of healthy relationships. So I read Atwood's novel with that particular topic and lens in mind. So following up on several of the things that Carol talked about, I wanted to talk about how Atwood refers to her work not as science fiction, but rather as speculative fiction or social science fiction. So her narrative in this book, The Year of the Flood, models a possible future, unfortunately an all too possible future, one that focuses on the human and social consequences of creating or simply maintaining a life in a post-apocalyptic or dystopic society, as Carol just talked about. So in my reading of the novel, she offers us a very multifaceted perspective of humanity, a very complex one. And it was particularly noteworthy in my reading that Atwood brings this fictional social world to life, that is where there's any life left in this post-plague world, by alternately focusing on the experiences of two main characters whose lives, past and present, intertwine in both tragic and miraculous ways. So Atwood shows us this fictional world through the eyes of Wren, a pole dancer at a local sex joint named Scales and Tails, and Toby, a woman who was rescued by the religious group the Gardeners from a sexually and emotionally abusive boss at Secret Burger, where everyone loves a secret. And unlike so many other novels that you've probably read in which there's a female protagonist or main character, not all novels have a female protagonist or main character, The Year of the Flood focuses neither on romance or a heterosexual pairing, right? The love between a heterosexual pairing. I mean, there are some backstories there, but it's not the main focus. So that's what I want to talk about in the rest of my comments. Rather, it's a friendship. The friendship between Wren and Toby is what really spoke to me. Right, the friendship between two women, which is rare in popular novels. Friendship that involves both risk-taking and emotional connection in the direst of circumstances. And it's this friendship that provides the ultimate contrast to the emotional desolation and, in many ways, the spiritual emptiness and loneliness of a social world that has become dictated by a group called the Corsair Corps and its quest for money, consumption, sex, and power. And this is the relationship at the heart, so to speak, of the novel. And it's a friendship that survives the most challenging of social, economic, and political circumstances in the midst of profound disappointment, despair, and death. And in my reading, it's as if Atwood is telling us that any hope for humankind lies not necessarily in technological advancements that have given this fictional society, among other things, genetically engineered humans and all of these mixed species, but rather it's these basic human connections, like the friendship between Toby and Wren, that allow us to survive when these advancements go awry, as they certainly do in the novel and as they do in our own social world. So I read Atwood's novel not so much as an indictment of technology or science or even religious fanaticism, but rather as a celebration. And I was surprised that I actually wrote that word down in my comments. For those of you who read the novel, it was very difficult for me to read. Was it difficult for some of you to read the story? Yeah, some of my students, several of my students that I taught to one-on-one use the word anxiety and sadness and despair. But I read it as a celebration of the power of friendship and community, however imperfect, to sustain our humanity, even if only in its most basic and basest sense, especially when our quest for power and money and immortality leave us with little else.
I'm Patrick Duffy. I'm professor of Spanish and Dean of Humanities, and I agree with everything that Jennifer and Carol said, so I'll pass it on now. I taught a course, my CI this semester. The title of it is Barbarism, Civilization, and Everything in Between. It's a really cool CI. Who are my CI people here? Yay, woo, yeah, all right. Anyway, shout out. So I'm going to talk about, my impressions of it. I mean, in the Spanish program, we don't just teach the language, we also teach literature, so I'm also a literature person. And the themes that we're dealing with in my CI course are obviously this idea of barbarism and the idea of civilization. No civilization thinks of itself as barbarous, right? They always think of some other group as barbarous. And so we're going to end up, reading lots of texts that have to do with that kind of dialectic, that kind of struggle that's gone on throughout history between, those who think of themselves as civilized and those who think of themselves as barbaric. I mean, it's the cause, I think, of a lot of the wars in history. There are wars that have been fought by quote-unquote civilized people who are trying to bring enlightenment to those in darkness. And you can think of examples. You can think of examples that are both recent and not so recent. The Spaniards were trying to save the souls of the indigenous peoples of the Americas. They were also looking for gold. They were also doing a lot of things. But, we were trying to bring, we in the U.S. were trying to bring democracy to the Middle East or something. At least that's what some people said, right? So my course deals with a lot of contemporary issues, a lot of not so contemporary issues, things that have been going on for a long time, and I think this book does as well. And I'd like to focus on 4 elements: the barbarism, the civilization, but also technology and art. You have, I think, 3 main groups in this novel. You have, of course, God's gardeners. You have the health-wiser compound people who live in this very technologically advanced environment. And then later in the novel, you have these genetically engineered people, right? These quote-unquote perfect people that Glenn made. So I asked my class, which, are there elements, are there barbarous elements in each of these groups? Are there civilized elements? And the answers I got were very complicated. God's gardeners, in some ways they're kind of barbarous, and they're seen as barbarous because, they dress really strangely, and they're fanatics, and, they're in a cult, basically, right? God, that's got to be barbarous. But on the other hand, there's a lot of good things, too, that we would see as civilized. They respect life, not just human life, but a lot of animal life. In fact, they humanize a lot of animal life. If it has a face, you can't eat it or something, even if it's an insect and it's gross or something. So there's good things, there are, barbarous things, there are civilized things. And what about the health-wiser compound group? Do they have, barbarous elements? Well, my students said, well, they're, obsessed with all of their possessions, and they're very materialistic, and they're very shallow, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of good relationships in that, getting back to this idea of relationship. And I agree 100% with Jennifer that this novel is a celebration of relationships. But maybe, an interesting question is, what is the attitude towards technology? Another interesting question is, where do we find art in this reality? And, technology, what is the relationship between technology and civilization? If you pay attention to the media nowadays, technological advances, anything new with computers or anything new with whatever is celebrated, and all of us become really, really happy, and we'll be happier when the iPhone 5 comes out, right? Technology can be a source of great happiness, But is it really, does it really have to do with civilization? And one thing that we're going to read about in my course, for instance, there was this novel called The Lost Steps that was written right after World War II. There's a character in there that can't listen to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony in 1947, and why would that be? Because Beethoven's Ninth was produced by Germany, which had just got through killing 6 million Jews. So the most civilized, quote-unquote, culture on earth had just done the most barbaric thing to other human beings. So just because you're technologically advanced, and just because you're educated, and even if you have a liberal arts education, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to do heinous and barbaric things. No, I didn't say Hannah and Barbera. I said heinous and barbaric, okay? So anyway, all right. So technology isn't necessarily good. Health-wiser compound, they've got a lot of things going on that aren't so good. What about the art question? Where is the art? Well, one of the places where there is art, can anyone name, one artist in this novel who actually creates certain pieces? Amanda, very good. A gold star for her. Yes. Yeah, and she creates this really interesting art that is ephemeral, that doesn't last very long, you know, and it spells out words like kaput, right, with little animals, you know, gobbling up this sweet stuff on bones. So it's a lot of mixing of so the art doesn't come from the perfect place. It doesn't come from the perfect blue people. It comes from this really damaged person, Amanda, who's, you know, kind of a hybrid of the compound world and the God's gardener world. It comes from this mixing. It comes from these people that have relationships. And so that's where the positive thing can come from, you know, these relationships and the art. And that's true civilization.
So my name is Andra Troncali, and I teach in the physics department, so I'm a scientist. Pretty much when I was reading The Year of the Flood, I was interested in seeing how the author is portraying science and technology. Very often fiction works show that rapid scientific and technological advances bring society to its downfall. So moving away from fiction, even in our current society, many people are afraid of the technological changes in the ways that we process our food. People are scared of pandemics that seem to occur fairly regularly. Think of bird flu, swine flu, West Nile virus. So people have a general feeling that because we don't live as naturally as we used to, we could unleash diseases that we could not yet foresee. So I think that these worries should be taken seriously. I think that people should know what is in their food. I usually like to see a label that tells me what's in the food that I buy. People should take precautions during an epidemic. But I also want to point out that science has improved our lives tremendously, an aspect on which fiction does not seem to focus as much. So just as an example, life expectancy in 1912, so 100 years ago, was 51.5 years for men and almost 56 years for women. Now it is almost 76 for men and almost 81 for women. That's a gain of 25 years. Now it may not mean much to you. You're 18, you think you're gonna live forever. But your parents are probably in their 50s, and it's nice to still have them around. They can help you, they can pay for college. So, so this is just one of the benefits. We have a gain in life expectancy, and this can be attributed to advances in medical technologies. We also have, we don't just live longer, we live better. We have central heating, air conditioning. It adds to our comfort. We have appliances at home. We don't have to spend all of our time doing chores. And you also have your gadgets, the iPhone and so on. So, however, despite these advances, fiction doesn't always focus on this. I guess this would not make for good drama, so lots of fiction focuses on the harmful aspects of technology. So going back to our book, I think that it portrays many ways in which technology has been misused. We read about genetically modified animals, the green rabbits, the raccoons. We read about cosmetic procedures that are quite radical, placing scales on people, the women that work at SexMart. We read about the health wizard supplements that possibly made Toby's mom really sick. So these all imply a society in which man is excessively controlling nature, changing nature, without any regard to the environment and to other life forms. So at first sight, you would think that the book is an indictment of science and technology. One group that has been described in the book, and other people before me have mentioned them, are the God's gardeners. And the word God in their title, the saints, the prayers, the hymns, all indicate that they are a religious group, which would be kind of in opposition to the scientists or the technologists group. And also the book then goes on to show that they were correct, the gardeners were correct in their premonition of a waterless flood. And it shows them to be the only group prepared for the times that come right after the flood. Toby's pretty good at surviving after all those bad things happen. So we could then interpret the book as to say that it portrays a conflict between science and religion, and that is religion that ultimately wins. However, to me, the book portrays a more nuanced view. I see Adam 1 more like a scientist than a religious man, and that's being a scientist, I guess. I tend to see, you tend to see more what you are than something different. But we learned that Adam 1 used to be a scientist. He was an epidemiologist. And if we pay more attention to life on their compound, we realize that the rules and the approaches that they have describe an environmentalist lifestyle. They recycle many things. They make toys from old things. So they find new uses for old things. The food they grow is organic. They use natural household cleaners. They have their obsession with vinegar. And all their classes are there that they have are designed to develop environment-friendly survival skills. Fabric recycling, culinary arts, so they try to make vegetarian food palatable. I think at some point somebody talks about turnip pie, which I can't imagine how that would be. Bees and mycology, etc. So they have all these classes, and then the next question is, where are the religious classes? So could we say that Adam 1 has disguised his science as a religion? He talks about DNA, he believes in evolution. Has he found a way to carry his scientific message through religion? And why would he do that? So is it because society had degraded to such an extent that the scientific background of those around him is so low that they could not comprehend him if he did speak to them in scientific terms? We are not told a lot about the society, about schools. Most kids are just kind of roaming the streets, stealing stuff, so we don't know if they're getting education. We do get the feeling that the society is somewhat dumbed down. The names for a lot of things have become very simple: Corsi Core, Sex Smart, Health Wiser, Super D, that's a bug spray, and they also have the wrong spelling for words. So we get this feeling that the society has devolved, talking about evolving and civilization and so on. So maybe that's why he chooses to use these, the religious terms to get people to understand his scientific ideas. Also, does Adam 1 feel that he could get more followers if he's presenting his ideology as a religion, because he feels that scientists have gotten a bad reputation? They've been modifying, they've been doing all these genetically modified animals and so on. So maybe he's trying to say that his ideas are not scientific. He has this religion that goes with it. So this kind of ties in a little bit with the class that I'm teaching. Our CI class is called Science Literacy in Our Society. And we are reading, one of the books that we are reading is called Unscientific America, and it talks about the disconnect between scientists and the general public. Some of the blame that they assign in this book is to the scientists. They say that they are either unwilling, the scientists are unwilling to talk to the public, or when they do talk, they are ineffective in talking to the public about scientific topics. So in this particular society where things are very dumbed down, maybe Adam 1 has found a way to communicate with the public. Not that I advocate this, but it's a thought. So I think that the book is more indicative of what happens to science and technology when society breaks down, and of the general uses and misuses of science. It appears to me that the general message is that science was misused by the society before the flood, but science is still the hope for a new society, in particular in the way that the gardeners use it with respect towards life and the environment. This should maybe provoke us to think about the ways in which we use society in our own, we use science in our society, and kind of decide what do we really want to do, in which ways do we want to be involved in science, and how do we want to use it in our own society. Thank you.
My name is Peter Hyland. I'm an assistant professor of physics in the physics department. So the thing that I wanted to talk about was sort of the complexity and messiness of this book. I like a simple narrative, if you will. Like I find it easy to read something where everything is chronological. Okay, that's not so much this book, and of the other books of Atwood's that I've read, not so much either. This is really more of a it has a plot, don't get me wrong, okay? But more of this is a character piece talking about Toby and Ren and how they relate to each other. But also how many other things relate to each other and how messy those really are, those relationships. So for one messiness, one complexity of this book is the chronology, is that you're reading this book and you're constantly going from present day where you are post-flood at some level. And I'm always going back and like trying to decide, every time that I'm reading Toby, am I still moving forward or am I in a flashback? Every time I go to the present, am I a little farther in the present, or is it all mixed together? And so that makes it more difficult to read. But it also means that you get motivations for what Toby is doing. She does something, and then you wonder, why is she doing this? Then you get a flashback, which motivates why she does that, gives you a connection to Ren, and gives you an idea, more information, little bit by little bit, about who Toby is, who Ren is, what this world is like. And so, where I would love to have, I like to have a book which will give me all of the big picture and then sort of move in to something. So I know what the world is, I know what everything is going on, and then we go in and then we start the story. This book doesn't do that, but it does what it does do. It's world building very effectively. It motivates you. It leads you along with little tidbits. As if you had been dumped into this world, you wouldn't have someone standing there saying, okay, as you know, on this world, everything's gone to hell. And here's some people, and they had a really rough life, but they know each other, so that's okay. Like, you don't get that if you were to be plopped down, right? So at some level, it reflects our real life. You know, we do try to bring you guys in here and say, this is what Austin College is like. A, B, C, D, D, right? But you heard the first 2 and not the next 20, right? Because your brain only gets so much in at a time, and then you're figuring all the rest of it out as you go, which is sort of the experience that we get reading this book, is we're figuring Toby and we're figuring Ren out as we go by seeing the world through their eyes and by seeing their recollections and by seeing what they're doing now. Another area of the complexity which I guess I liked, it made me anxious, is this mixing, strong mixing, obvious mixing of science and religion. As a scientist, I like to think of science and religion as 2 separate things. I've, in my life, had many conversations with people who see science and religion as in opposition to each other. And that's not the case. As someone who's very active in my church when I was in high school and someone who has a PhD in physics, I don't see that. I understand where that can come from, but I don't see them as in conflict, as in opposition, as one trying to supplant the other. But there's very, very strong mixing of science and religion in the book. You know, the saints of God's gardeners are, you know, Watson and Crick, Jane Goodall, right? You know, they're very obviously, very blatantly scientists. And so I read this and I'm like, I'm not sure that I'm okay with this at some level, because it sort of seems to imply at some level that this is something that maybe is okay to do, maybe it's not okay to do, right? It says that this is something which can happen. But stopping and thinking about it a little bit more, you know, we are all individuals. We have some aspects of our lives that we try to compartmentalize. As a scientist, when I do science, I try to not be subjective about it. I try to be objective. I try to leave my biases at the door and just look at the data and analyze the data. And I do my very best at that, and I'm at least good enough to have made it this far. But at the end of the day, I'm still human. I still take everything that is who I am, all of my experiences, all of my biases into the lab with me. I still have, you know, scientific and religious views that I have all the time. You don't just shut them off. You know, and so this sort of very messy mixing of science and religion really calls that into sharp focus, that this is something that we all do all the time, whether we think we do or not. You know, if you consider yourself a very devout religious person and that you have no truck with science, really, you have that iPhone 4, right? You know, you have a computer, right? You read email, you must read email. Even me, as a scientist, you know, even I have friends who are atheists. You know, that is a religious view. So these are things that exist in all of us all the time, and it's something that we do need to address. And it's something that made you think about how these things that seem very disparate, maybe seem very like oil and water, that need to be resolved. I think that is the case, that there is a lot of science and technology that goes on in our lives that we need to address, because eventually it's going to come to a head for us personally or culturally.
Hi, my name is Terry Hoops, and I teach anthropology in the sociology anthropology department here. And I read this book. Actually, I listened to it on CD last year during the summer when I was driving with my son through Latin America. And we were going from country to country. And long before I knew that this was going to be your assignment, and long before I knew that I was going to be teaching CI. From that perspective, it's quite interesting because the book relates so well to the subject of RCI, which I'll talk about in just a second, and so well to anthropology. A comment, the fragmentary nature of the book seemed to go well with the fragmentary nature of our travels. We were traveling through Central America, I think, when we first started listening to this book, and going from country to country and really going into different realities, having to look at poverty and wealth, in differential poverty and wealth in different countries, different governmental systems, different senses of citizenship and civil society, those kinds of things. And this really was strange and yet very relevant to our experience of the different countries and the different places we were in. I, as an anthropologist, I like to look at the qualities of social criticism or social critique in authors like Margaret Atwood. And one of the things I do is I tend to, in books, tend to go to indexes and acknowledgments. Do you ever read acknowledgments? Because I want to know something about the author and where they're coming from. And bibliographies, I love bibliographies, so I go to the bibliography a lot. And so I went to, when I got the copy of the book rather than the on tapes book, I got I went to the acknowledgments, and Margaret Atwood starts her acknowledgments page with, "The year of the flood is fiction, but the general tendencies and many of the details in it are alarmingly close to fact." And this is what I'm looking for. I want to see how well an author understands reality and understands an alternative reality that shows something about our reality. Anthropology is a discipline that one anthropologist put it this way: it's a discipline that gives us insight into ourselves, or an understanding of ourselves via a route that is through the understanding of the other. We understand others in order to understand ourselves. And in many ways, the science fiction writer or the alternative reality writer or the futuristic writer like Margaret Atwood is doing somewhat the same thing, trying to give a window onto who we ourselves are. And so as I read through the book, I wanted to see, well, is she accurate? Is she sensitive? Is she looking at who we are through this lens of the future? And I found it complex and very convincing in many ways. And I want to note our CI focuses on books that gave us new insights into the world. And the first book is Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, and it's about the environmental movement. Well, she starts with a a condemnation of the overuse of technology in this case, the overuse of technology, a pesticide that has consequences that weren't foreseen in the producer's formula, right? They wanted to get rid of pests, but it also got rid of birds, it got rid of predators of those pests, it destroyed soil, it destroyed water, and so in many ways, Atwood has, in her description of the environment in this ultra hyper technological society, reflects many of the anxieties and concerns that Rachel Carson had. We're reading a book by Michael Harrington, who talks about the commitment that society must have to all members of society. There is a commitment to civil society, and I wanted to mention this because one of the primary characteristics of the book that I haven't heard anybody talk about so far, but which I think is really important in an election year, remember it's an election year, where we're looking at the future of the kind of society we want in the U.S. What kind of society is this? This is a society that lacks civil society, that lacks government. And very interesting when you contrast it, for instance, with George Orwell's dystopia, in which the enemy, the problem is big government, right? The problem in this country, in this book, is just the opposite. There is no government. There is no one looking out for the welfare of everyone. Okay. And instead there is corporations who look after their own economic interests. And so in many ways, her book reflects the concerns that Michael Harrington, in talking about the poor, the other America, the hidden America, reflects the concerns that they have. I think this is an issue that we all need to talk about, and there's lots of other issues in the book, but I just want to get you to think, what does civil society mean? What does it mean to have a common sort of framework that we all share? This is a society where there's lots of divisions. People live in gated communities, they live in corporate communities, and then there are those who are lost and on the outside, the plebs. And so these are kinds of issues that I think she accurately and in a complex way deals with.